Welcome, my friends, to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I'm Jack Moline. I'm the president of Interfaith Alliance, and we're here for the next 20 minutes or so chatting with my colleague, my good friend, and my predecessor, Greg Lebel. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Jack. It's nice to see you.
It's good to see you. You know, the first thing I ask everybody is how you're doing in these times.
Doing, doing well. I think I realize in going through this that for Glenn and me, this is really sort of a big inconvenience, and that's kind of it. Glenn is working at home. As you know, I'm pretty much retired now, still doing a few things, and we're not facing some of the really terrible things that other people here in the United States and around the world are facing. We don't have kids at home. We're not, we're not seeing our incomes go away. So I have absolutely no right to complain.
Well, you have a right to complain, but
Well,
perhaps not as loudly as everybody else.
yeah, okay.
And are you in DC or are you out in Delaware where I know you spent some
Just
time?
just north of the DC line in Tacoma Park, Maryland.
Very nice. Well, one of our staff members there, my colleague Jay Keller, lives in Tacoma Park
Oh
also.
yes, of course,
He
yes.
told me that last week he got a message from one of his neighbors that everyone should come out on their porch at 5:30 with a drink, and they'd have the opportunity to yell at each other as they always wanted to do.
That's a great idea.
So you should go down to that neighborhood. Stand in the middle of the street. There's
That's
nobody
right.
driving.
Yeah, that's right. That's called coping. Yeah.
There you go. Greg, I wonder if, for the benefit of our viewers and listeners who may not know you as well as the rest of us, you tell us about the work that you've been doing, you did for many years before you retired from the George Washington University, and what you're doing these days.
Sure. And in a sense, I'm still doing some of that, although I've been officially retired for 3 years now. But when I was at the George Washington University, my background is in, as you know, Jack, is in politics, is in electoral politics, going back to George McGovern's campaign in 1972, which was my first paid political job. After having done that for that sort of work for a number of years, about 25 years ago, I actually moved over, not entirely, but got a faculty position at George Washington University at the Graduate School of Political Management. And in addition to teaching graduate courses, I had the opportunity about 14 years ago to begin to do some work particularly around Native American issues. We created, while I was there, two scholarship programs for Native American students, one for college students and one for high school students. And before I left, the last thing that I did was we created what we called the Center for Indigenous Politics and Policy at GW, which was an opportunity to sort of pull a lot of the work we've been doing with students together into a broader context of research and advocacy on Native issues. And I am just, it's interesting at this juncture, because I went 6 months ago, they asked me to come back for a little bit of time. There was the center was going through some transition. And so I went back as sort of interim director in between the change in permanent directorships there, and had an opportunity to sort of re-engage in the work, particularly the work of the center, which has been really rewarding and continues to be an important aspect of my life and interest.
Terrific. And I know you worked on Mayor Pete Buttigieg's presidential campaign. I think we'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay. All right.
But I
great.
want to ask you now, in these times of stress and quarantine for us, other than keeping yourself and your husband safe, what are you focused on?
Well, I was thinking about that earlier today, and as I sort of clicked on CNN and then clicked it off, and I think in some ways, Jack, it's what I'm not focusing on. I guess I'm in sort of a different place than your earlier interviewees, because, as I said, I'm really sort of in at least a semi-retired sort of mode. I'm trying not to get to watch too much TV, particularly too much, well, TV in general, but certainly try to turn the news off and sort of give myself a little breather from that. As I said, I'm continuing to do work with the center, which is an important outlet for me. I am, besides that, and again, you mentioned the Buttigieg campaign, which of course has now come to an end, but I'm also a lay leader at my church, at All Souls Episcopal Church in DC, which is taking up a lot of time, as you well know, as we houses of worship are facing these challenging times and finding ways to be a part of the lives of our congregations in ways that that don't require that we're all sitting in the same room. So it's been a real that's been something that's been absorbing more of my time. And I have to say that the other piece is Glenn and I have a sort of unofficial niece. She will be 8 in May. She's home with her parents. Both her parents are working from home now. And we have found that I can actually video babysit for Gabby, which is the high point of the day. In fact, I'll be doing it later today. We're going to spend an hour together at 4 o'clock. It gives her parents an opportunity to sort of focus on their work and not worry about her. And we get to play games and read together. And I can't tell you what a wonderful sort of medicine that is for all that we're in right now.
That's great. My wife is doing the same thing for an hour every afternoon with our 5-year-old granddaughter, while her 2-year-old brother takes a nap.
Yep.
And
yeah.
I get brought in for 15 minutes of Passover school as part of that hour. So it's wonderful, and it's not only a great break for her parents, it's a great break for Ann and me from staring at a screen with work all day.
Exactly. That's my experience exactly with it.
So we've had to find, as you said, at least a temporary new norm to deal with here. And you having this background in electoral politics, and especially having been so involved in a very intense campaign for the Democratic nomination, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what these times are going to do to our democratic processes, because we still have an election scheduled for November.
It's interesting and question, and there's a complex answer to it, or many answers to it, I think. And I think we have to back up a little bit and realize that we were already in a unique position in this country, and I think that the Trump years will leave us changed from where we were before 2016. And I think we're beginning to we were just beginning to get a sort of sense of what that might be when this virus hit, which leads again to that broader question: what will we be like when we come out of this? We won't be the same, either in a post-Trump presidency or in a post-coronavirus world. And I think, for me anyway, the jury is certainly out on the latter of those two. I've had conversations with several friends over the last couple of weeks about this very question. Do we come out of this more polarized, more distrustful and suspicious of each other? Or do we find in this process that we begin to recognize that we are all in this together, that we share wherever we come from and whatever our beliefs are, that there is a common purpose and a common good here that we recognize through this process. And I think we're sort of on the bubble right now. I don't think we really know where this will go. In terms of the now nitty-gritty, in terms of the election, obviously the whole thing has been thrown into a state of almost suspension right now. The president is certainly making sure he's on television every day. The presumptive nominee, Joe Biden, is trying desperately to find ways to communicate with the American people from the family room in his home in Delaware. And we still have yet to formally resolve the question of who the Democratic nominee will be. The other thing that occurs to me is the question is, what will these conventions, how are we going to run conventions this summer? It's hard to imagine that we'll be in a position to be able to run a traditional convention where thousands of people get together in a gigantic room and spend 3 or 4 days kind of hanging out together. And I'm sure these conversations are going on in smaller rooms or like this all around the country now and figuring out sort of how is this going to work. We're in really uncharted territory in a lot of ways right now, I think.
There's certainly no constitutional precedent for changing the time of the election, or of either extending or truncating the term of office of anybody in federal office.
Right, right.
But can you imagine for us a scenario or two of what could happen if we are still dealing with these health crises as we get closer to the time of the election?
Again, an important and question with an unclear answer. You will remember that after 9/11, the mayoral race in New York was actually postponed because I believe it was to happen the next day,
Right.
on the 12th. And they did postpone the mayoral election, but that's a very different situation than obviously a presidential election. You're right. There is no precedence for it. I'm not a constitutional scholar, but I'm not aware of anything in the Constitution that allows for flexibility around the date of the election and the date of the change of administrations. That's all been worked out prior. I'm a bit of a cynic with the, or at least a skeptic with the current administration, and it wouldn't surprise me if that became a topic of conversation for political reasons. And I don't know, we have learned to expect the unexpected with this, as with everything else. It concerns me. I suspect that there would be a very strong negative reaction to any attempt to change that. But again, we expect the
Who knows?
unexpected these days.
You and I have spent a lot of time over the past 25 years that Interfaith Alliance has been in existence, worrying about the influence and the role of religious organizations and faith-based communities in this electoral process. How does that change given the way that one set of faith communities has lined up in support of the president, and another seems to have lined up opposed to much of what he's doing with what we're facing electorally right now?
I suspect it won't change. Well, I may be wrong. I was going to say I suspect it won't change dramatically. We continue to see the religious right take these positions, which are, I would say, more political than faith-based. I read there's another story in the Washington Post today about some of the big Christian megachurches and smaller Christian churches that are telling their people, no, we're going to get together. This is not real. This is a made-up thing by the people who want to get at Donald Trump. And these are religious leaders who are making this argument. I don't know how they sleep at night, I guess is the best way to put it. I really don't. When you're putting people in what the scientific community clearly tells us is a dangerous situation, and they're encouraging their folks to put themselves in these dangerous situations. I think that on the other side, I think progressive religious communities, again, have always been very cautious and careful, I think, about overstepping constitutional issues and so on and so forth, and how they get engaged in the political world. But we may see that change a little bit. All of this may be enough to push some of the progressive communities into being a little bit more vocal. And you mentioned Pete Buttigieg, for whom I worked. And I think Pete was someone who, for whom his faith, the way he grew up, the faith that he identifies with now, is an important aspect of his life, which is the case for so many of us. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, two of us are talking to each other right now. And I think that Pete found a way to talk about his values that are born in part of born in a part of his faith, in a way that is authentic and isn't a sort of my way or the highway kind of kind of language, which is sort of what we're used to, particularly when Christians are talking about, when conservative Christians are making these cases. So I think, and I know for a fact that there were people who identify as Democrat, members of the Democratic Party, people who are in positions in the Democratic Party, who were actually alarmed when they started hearing this. And I think that that alone may have begun to change some of that, which I think is not a bad thing, but it's a risky thing.
It is a good thing that people are able to talk more frankly about their personal beliefs. I would agree with you. The constitutional issue, though, is an interesting one.
It is.
We have, as you mentioned, some of the, I hope that they are the fringe members of the religious right, who are insisting that faith is going to protect them from science as we struggle with this. And yet, those of us in what you describe well as the more progressive community insist that the Constitution protects beliefs and religious practices no matter how wacky we may think they are. What is someone who is an advocate of the constitutional protections of freedom of religion supposed to do about groups that insist on violating the quarantine and social distance requirements?
Again, you raise some really powerful and complicated questions. And I relate to this directly, and I think that we have seen it in other ways as well. And I think one of the debates has been going on in this country for a while is the line between the constitutional protection of religion or protection from religion, if that's where you are, which is sort of up against that question of how one functions in the public square. And that sort of the connection between those two. I think of Hobby Lobby as a good example, one that just sort of drove me a little crazy at the time. Sort of, when you're running a business, there are laws about non-discrimination and so on and so forth. When you not in all kinds of businesses and so on and so forth. And so and I think we're still trying to figure out where that line is between someone's right to live according to whatever religious precepts he or she holds, as you said, however wacky, and the requirement that they in the public square they treat the rest of us with dignity and with equality and with respect. I don't think we know where that line is yet. I think we're still trying to figure that out. And I'm not sure that we will.
I think we have plenty of time to think about it over the next few weeks. Yeah. We're nearing the end of our time, Greg, and I've asked each of my guests if they would suggest something to people who are watching or listening at home that they might do to create a little fuller day than simply worrying about the coronavirus. What would you suggest?
I think we talked. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we talked about it at the beginning. I think, and thank God for social media is all I can say, because I mean, connecting with family, just having a Zoom conversation, or FaceTime conversation. With family who are far away or who we can't see physically go visit right now. Spend some time with a kid. I think you and I are on the same page with that. Yep. I mean, these are the things that I actually. I mean, these times are actually little blessings for me, I think, and I think I would highly recommend that.
It's a great way to look at it. Greg Lebel, you're a good friend of mine, you're a good friend of our organization, and you're a good friend of people of faith, no matter their perspective. So thank you for being with us today. Please be well yourself, and to our viewers and listeners, stay home, stay focused.
Thanks, Jack.